PBS NewsHour launched a new series this week shedding light on the racial and economic disparities within America's criminal justice system. The series is called Searching for Justice. It dives into the challenges people face once they are released from prison and try to re-enter society. This is all made significantly more difficult because of the coronavirus pandemic. Joining us now to talk about this series is PBS NewsHour correspondent and producer William Brangham. William, welcome. Great to have you with us. So what was the inspiration and ultimate goal of this series?
Hi, Tanya. Thank you so much for having me. As you mentioned, there are so many important stories that are going on right now, and the pandemic has taken our focus for all of us news organizations. But we wanted to not forget to try to stay on top of these other issues that are going on. And as you mentioned, the struggle that people have when they are coming out of prison is one of those. And the pandemic has exacerbated, we know, so many aspects of our society. Economically, it's people of color are getting sicker and getting infected more than others. The pandemic has exacerbated these things. And one of those things the pandemic has also made it worse is people getting out of prison. And so we wanted to look at specifically, okay, in the midst of this global pandemic, with the shutdown going on, a virus raging across the country, what are the specific challenges for people getting out of prison? And that's what this series really is.
And your piece specifically focuses on a man named Michael Plummer. Can you tell us about him and why his story turned out so differently from other people released from prison?
Well, Michael Plummer is unfortunately not that uncommon of a story. He grew up in a very violent neighborhood in Washington, D.C. He killed another teenage boy in a clash with two different crews in Washington. He was selling drugs for many years, and he went away for 24 years. But he was a model prisoner, and because of a D.C. law that went back and looked at juvenile offenders who have seemingly turned their lives around, he was released. And he is now on the outside trying to stop other young people from falling into the same trap that he fell into. And so we followed him over a good period of time, and we will continue to follow him. He now goes into youth correctional facilities and talks to younger people about trying to get them to recognize the things they could do now so they don't end up like him, basically growing up in prison, as he put it.
And of course, you know, as you've been saying, being released from prison is often a process for many former inmates. You know, during normal times, it's already challenging enough. But then to re-enter a world that's been drastically altered because of a pandemic, what kind of help is available for these former inmates, you know, when they leave prison and they have to enter the strange world as we now know it?
That's right. There are an enormous amount of resources. I mean, the best network of organizations that we have found have been the local organizations. So if you live in, say, Richmond, Virginia, where I was earlier this week, or in Oakland, California, or in Tulsa, Oklahoma, you will find a network of local nonprofits that are geared to helping people who are coming out of prison. They'll help you find jobs, they'll help you find housing, they'll help you work on getting a driver's license and getting a Social Security card, without which you have a hard time reintegrating into society. There's a few national organizations. Goodwill, that many people know of, is a great organization for helping people find jobs. The National Reentry Resource Center is a great resource where people can go and say, I live in Tacoma, Washington. Where are the organizations here locally that can help me? Those groups are terrific. The National Alliance for Recovery Residences also helps people find housing, which is a crucial thing. You get out of jail, you have nowhere to live on day one. If you don't have a place to live, very difficult to get a job, very difficult to try to stay out of a life of crime if you don't have a place to live. So lots of good local organizations. You just have to know where to look to find them.
And what would you say the process of working on this series? What's the biggest single thing that you learned or that surprised you?
The thing that I took for granted, which is all of the documents that I have either in a box upstairs in my house or in my wallet that I just take for granted, a driver's license, Social Security card, the deed for my house. A lot of people who go away to prison, especially for long periods of time, and especially for younger people, Those things are very, very difficult to put their hands on. If you've been in prison for several decades, you don't necessarily even know how to navigate the internet. You get out of prison, and all of a sudden the DMV has a 4-month wait time because of the pandemic. How do you get a driver's license? Like all of these things that you and I take for granted that, okay, we have to wait a little bit longer at the DMV to get our license renewed. It's no big deal for you and me. But if you're coming out and you can't get a job, you can't sign a lease, you can't get health insurance without being able to prove who you are, that was one of the things that I hadn't really thought about until we started working on this series. And it's sort of something I really struck how fortunate we are to have the resources available to us that are really not available to people who've been locked up for a long time.
And I guess there are no sort of pre-release programs that start working on these things with inmates a couple of months before they're set to be released?
There are some of those, and it really varies. You would think if we want people coming out of prison to best be able to be citizens again and not recidivate and fall back into a life of crime, some states are great about doing this. Virginia in particular is held up as a model for a place that really does, several months before you get out, try to get you job interviews, try to get your driver's license, try to figure out how to find your birth certificate if you don't have a copy of that. Other places are not. And so you'd think it would be a common practice, but different counties, different states, different cities do it very differently. And it's really sort of a haphazard pattern across the country.
Well, William Brangham, thank you for joining us and shedding light on all of this. And the latest installment of Searching for Justice airs tonight on PBS NewsHour starting at 6 p.m. Eastern. Thanks again.
Tanya, thanks so much for having me.